Hi, welcome everybody. Just a reminder to switch your mobiles off and that we are being live streamed. So we're at the audit meeting on the 16th of March, and the first item is the minutes of the audit meeting on the Wednesday the 19th of January. Sorry, governance meeting, not audit. We're not in audit, we're in governance. Old words. Does anybody have any items of accuracy for the minutes from the 19th of January? Okay, are we all okay for those minutes to be approved? I think we're using the system. Are we using the system for the minutes? Okay, vote now. Lovely. We're one short. The green button. Yeah, they're carried anyway. Yeah. Lovely. Just lost my thing now. So on to item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have anybody declaring an interest? No. Lovely. Item 3, statutory accounts, pages 7 to 152, and we've got Louise here to help us, the Director of Finance. Louise?
Thank you, Councillor Platt. So the statement of accounts were published back in October in their draft form, and we've now reached the point where those have been, the audit is almost complete by Grant Thornton, and so these are brought before Governance Committee today to seek approval of those accounts. It is a statutory requirement to produce the accounts, and I know just prior to this meeting we obviously had the training session to go through them in more detail. The requirement was that the accounts, the draft accounts, would be published by the 31st of July, and audited accounts would be produced by 30th September as reasonably practicable as can be done beyond that date. But at that point in time, only 9% of audits had been completed. And even though we are almost at the end of the financial year, we are definitely not the last one to have our accounts completed. As far as the changes are concerned from the accounts that are presented today with those that were published back in October, there have been just 2 material changes, and those are outlined in the covering report at points 18 and 19. They don't impact on the bottom line or impact on the overall financial position of the council. It's more about a reclassification, moving 1.695 million from prepayments within the debtors section to trade receivables again within the debtors section. So just a reclassification there, and also an adjustment of 883,000, moving that sum from short-term debtors to a reduction against the pension liability. There were some other small amendments in terms of more clarification added to the narrative, and some of those points are addressed further on in the agenda in Grant Thornton's paper about unadjusted misstatements and items found. So I'm happy to take any questions. I know we spent about an hour going through the accounts in some detail, but happy to take any questions on those accounts now, or if not, I'll just assume.
Thanks, Louise. Does anybody have any questions? Lovely. So the recommendation is that the committee should approve the audited statement of accounts for 2021. Appendix A, subject to the amendments which, in the opinion of the Director of Finance, the Section 151 officer, are minor in nature. Such minor amendments to be defined as non-material to the financial position of the authority. The Director of Finance will exercise this delegation in consultation with the Chair of Governance Committee. In the event that the Director of Finance is of the opinion the amendments are material to the financial position of the authority, Governance Committee will be reconvened to approve the new statement of accounts. And also the recommendation that the committee should authorise the Director of Finance and the Chair of Governance Committee to sign the letter of representation, which is Appendix B. Can we take a vote on that? Lovely. That's carried. Okay, so we'll move on to item 4, which is the 2020-2021 letter of representation. Louise again.
Okay, so the letter of representation, which is included in draft in the pack that you have received, is the proposed draft letter that myself as Director of Finance and Councillor Platt as Chair of the Governance Committee will provide to Grant Thornton to say that in connection with the audit we have provided all of the information and given explanations as required to the best of our knowledge and belief, and a lot of those statements are included within that letter, and it's just really for your consideration to ensure that everything that we have included in there is kind of concords with your understanding of the financial position of the council, and there's nothing in there that rings any alarm bells in any way, shape or form, that the assurances that we've given are anything other than accurate.
Thanks, Louise. Does anybody have any questions on the letter? Right, hold on. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name. It's Georgia, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, Georgia.
Thank you, Chair. So just to draw members' attention to the final page of that letter does set out any unadjusted misstatements which you need to agree to and approve that you are happy that they remain unadjusted. So at the moment it's showing an 85k one, but since the letter was done and since our report was written, we have identified a further item which the council have chosen not to adjust because it isn't material, and that's around grant income. So there was 675k of grant income incorrectly classified within the CIES. So the note will be updated is my understanding, but the comprehensive income and expenditure statement won't be updated for that amount. So you just also have to confirm that you are happy with that. I don't know if Louise wants to come back on that to confirm that's her understanding as well.
Yes, yeah, that concurs. Accounts and how that relates to the business grant income that was received by the council, acting in both capacity as agent and principal in the distribution of that, and it's a reclassification between both of those headings. Us acting as principal on those occasions where we had some discretion as to whom we awarded the grant monies to, and us acting as agent when we were just a conduit to take the money and then hand that out to the various businesses who qualified for the grant by virtue of the fact that they had a rateable value on the property. So it's just a reclassification between those two.
Okay, if there's no further questions... Oh, Councillor Platt.
I've got no idea now. Sorry. Just on that, on the appendix, the unadjusted misstatements, will that appear in the published version?
So we will. It gets included. It's published alongside the account, so we keep that, and we will make a note to that effect that within the accounts themselves, but as opposed to reworking all of the tables and all of the numbers, we won't. We will just make a note to that effect to say that we've chosen not to reclassify.
Yeah, and presumably it will be included in a reason for not adjusting in that fourth column along on page 158.
Yes,
There will be
yeah.
another, you'll justify why you're not adjusting it.
Yeah. And on the basis that it's, you know, although a sizable number, it's below the materiality threshold that would impact on any user of the accounts and change their opinion of what the accounts were trying to say as a consequence of us not putting through that adjustment.
Okay with that? Yeah, any more questions? So, the recommendations have adjusted slightly. So the recommendation is that the committee should authorise the Director of Finance and Chair of Governance Committee to sign the letter of representation, but also that the Governance Committee is happy that the CIES won't be adjusted for the £85,000 discrepancy that Grant Thornton's identified, for which Chorley consider it to be minor. Is it minor, the word that you use? Immaterial, sorry. I'll swap that. So we're just adding that extra bit on. Is that okay with everybody? Yeah, do you want to vote on that? Lovely. That's carried. Item 5 is the 2020-2021 audit findings, and it's Georgia again. Can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Chair. So, following on from the Statement of Accounts and Letter of Representation, this is our audit report, which sets out our findings from the audit of the financial statements for 2021. If I take you to agenda page 161, which is page 3 of our report, that just confirms that the work is substantially complete. So we've got a few very minor queries outstanding at the moment, but we do anticipate resolving those in the next few days. And then, subject to those not raising any kind of further amendments, we anticipate giving an unqualified opinion in the next week or so. So we just set out there a few things that at the time of writing the report were still outstanding. So in terms of that COVID grant funding, the first bullet point, that is now resolved, and that is the issue we've just talked about in terms of that unadjusted item. And then the other ones are fairly kind of small queries that are outstanding that we are just working through. Obviously, if anything did result in any kind of key figure or amendment, we would bring that back to yourselves or circulate that for approval and review. The following page, again, just really sets out the other areas of our work. So the value for money arrangements, that work is ongoing. So that is, if you like, decoupled from the opinion on the financial statements, and that needs to be completed within 3 months of giving that opinion on the statements. So we do have one risk in terms of major capital projects. So members of this committee may recall that when the audit findings report for 1920 was completed, there was some recommendations around the kind of business plans and the processes in place for major capital projects. So we will be following that up as part of this year's work. So then really, I guess the next key page is page 164, which does set out those materiality levels. So we've just been having a discussion around whether items are material and whether they need adjusting. So that's for your information, so you can see the levels that we are working to when we audit the financial statements. And then the following page starts looking at the significant risks. So you'll recall these from the audit plan that we submitted to yourselves, where we set out the risks that we'd identified and the work that we would do to mitigate those risks. So just in terms of revenue recognition, the testing is just at the point of being finishing at the moment. So subject to that last couple of points that we're just clarifying, we don't anticipate coming back to you with any issues to report around that, other than the kind of things that we've already set out in the discussion so far. In terms of management override and control, so that is now complete. So since the report's been written, we've finished our testing in that area, and there are no issues to report back to you in that risk. On the following page, page 166 of the agenda, is the valuation of land and buildings. So you recall this is obviously a big number within the accounts, a fairly complex number in that technically it is an estimate, although you do have obviously an expert valuer to complete that estimate. So we do quite a lot of work around the assumptions underlying those estimates and those valuations. Again, we've just got a couple of very final points to finish off, but I'm satisfied that we've done sufficient work that we can kind of report back to you that the valuations are not materially misstated in the accounts, and we're happy with the valuations as stated. Pension fund net liability on the following page, again, you know, very big figure within the accounts, quite complex. You have an actuary who works through those figures for you and provides them to the council. Even though you have an actuary doing that, that doesn't negate the auditor's duty to look at the assumptions that underlie those figures and how those figures are pulled together and the data that they are based on. So that's the work that we've carried out. The only item that we've identified is that the one that Louise has already mentioned about the prepayments of those deficit recovery contributions, and they have been adjusted in the accounts, so it is now correct the way that that shows in the accounts, and that's taking it out of debtors and adjusting the pension liability within the accounts. Then another key area of our work is kind of any key estimates or judgments within the accounts. So the next couple of pages just kind of go over the work we've done around those estimates and again the underlying assumptions and judgments that are made. So again, valuation of land and buildings and investment properties, we have nothing to report back to you on that, no significant issues identified. We've obtained sufficient evidence that those valuations have been properly prepared. Again, the following page, the net pension liability, so we set out some of the key assumptions there and, you know, confirm that they are within expected ranges for the calculation of those figures. We also get assurance from the auditor of Lancashire Pension Fund as well, so they give us their assurances around the central pension fund and we add that into our work to kind of give overall assurance to yourselves. The following page, so on one page 170 of the agenda now, so a couple of other biggish figures in the accounts, so provision for business rates appeals, so the council makes a provision for any appeals against business rate levels. Again, we've looked at that, we've not found anything in terms of how that provision is pulled together or the underlying information that would cause us any concern. In terms of grants, income recognition and presentation, so we've already identified that grant income discrepancy that we've talked about earlier in terms of the CIES, the Comprehensive Income and Expenditure Statement. So the disclosures, as we have said, will be updated. The Comprehensive Income and Expenditure Statement itself won't. And as already discussed, because that is not a material figure, we are content for that not to be adjusted. On the following page, minimum revenue provision. So we have a look at this. This is an amount that the council sets aside to repay kind of borrowing around capital projects. Again, we have made a recommendation around that because, I mean, really it's up to the council to set aside what they consider to be a prudent amount. We have a look at that and we do recommend that the council does kind of keep an eye on that going forward and revisit it just to make sure it does continue to be prudent and in line with the policy. And then heritage assets, this is the other area where we've made a recommendation. Our recommendations are at the end of the report in Appendix F. So the council has Astley Hall, which is a heritage asset, and that is valued at £1 at the moment, and that's because of the state of disrepair that that asset has been in for some time. So the council now are carrying out a programme of refurbishment and have, in terms of 2021, spent around 300k on that refurbishment. But it's been revalued and an expert, you know, has looked at that and it's still kind of, the council's looked at that and it's still valued at around £1. But obviously as that restoration work continues over the next year or two, we would recommend the council revisits that to revalue the property and make sure that valuation is appropriate and reflects the work done on the property as it improves. The next couple of pages I won't really go through in detail because there's just really other communication requirements that were kind of required to kind of bring to your attention as members, but there's no kind of concerns or significant matters within there. Page 174 just sets out the going concern assumption and the work we do around that, and we're satisfied the accounts should be prepared on a going concern basis. And again, a couple of pages in terms of our other responsibilities under the code. Again, nothing kind of significant to bring to your attention there. And then in terms of page 177, value for money arrangements, and page 178. So 178 gives that updated risk of significant weakness. So as already mentioned, this has come out of the 1920 audit and the completion of that. So the next item on the agenda is our audit plan. And that's exactly the same audit plan as you've already seen for 2021, except it has this updated risk that we've identified for VFM. And obviously that was identified after the issue of our original plan. So it's here for your information and that work is ongoing. And it's also in the updated audit plan, the next agenda item. We just confirm our independence to you, as we're required to do on an annual basis, and any other fees for other work that we do, so the certification of the housing benefit claim. And then the appendices just set out those adjustments that Louise has already mentioned and gone through with yourselves. So page 182, the adjusted misstatements. Page 183, that 85k unadjusted, and we will add into the final version the other item around grants that we've discussed already. A few other adjustments on the next couple of pages around kind of disclosures in the accounts and things that have been updated since the draft version. And then the only other thing really, we've got our draft opinion in there, but the other thing to bring to your attention is Appendix F, the action plan, page 195. And that's those two issues I've already mentioned to you around valuation of heritage assets and minimum revenue provision. So that's a quick canter really through the audit findings. So I'm happy to answer any questions for clarification or more information.
Thanks, Georgia. Have we got any questions on Grant Thornton's report? James?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thank you, Georgia, for a comprehensive report. It's going to sound like such a petty question, seeing as it's a brilliant report. So on page 171 and, of course, on 195, like you just mentioned, it's just to make sure you know where we're saying that as the whole has been revalued, it says 31st of March 2011. Just thought that might need correcting on both statements on the top of the paragraph. It's right further down in terms of 31st of March 2021. But, of course, it looks like we're looking at accounts from 10 years ago. So just thought once this is finally been approved, that does need changing. But apart from that, looks brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for pointing that out, and we'll make sure it's changed so it reflects the correct year. Thank you very much.
Is it material?
Depends on your opinion of materiality, I guess, really.
Any more questions? Great, we're just asked to note that report, so, yep. Item 6 is the Chorley Borough Council Audit Plan 2020-2021, and Georgia again, I think she's touched on this, yeah?
Yeah, so just very briefly to confirm, it's exactly the same plan that was brought to members earlier in the year, setting out the work that we intended to do, and has only been updated for that BFM risk. So at the time we brought the plan, the 1920 work on value for money was still ongoing. So now that that's completed and reported to yourselves, we've updated our risk assessment for 2021 to reflect the recommendations that came out of the 1920 work. So that's page 211 of the agenda, and that's the only key change to the audit plan. But because it is our audit plan, we are obliged to bring it back to you if we do make any changes to the original. So it's just really for information. And as I say, we will report back on the value for money work once that's complete.
Okay, members, have you got any questions for Georgia on the on that report? No, all quiet. We're just asked to note that report, so I think we can note that one. Item 7 is Homes England Compliance Audit, which is on pages 221 to 26. Louise, are you taking this one?
Selected for an audit and in relation to the Tatton development, and so there was we appointed auditor. They came in, reviewed all the documentation, the decision making, the paperwork, etc., to report back to Homes England, and we got a clean bill of health on that, and so it's just to update the governance committee to that.
Thanks, Louise. Has anybody got any questions on that one? Right, so we're asked to, the recommendation is to acknowledge the receipt of this report as required by Homes England, and to note that there were no breaches recorded, and that the report is green, meeting all requirements. So is that a vote or a note? Noted. That we've noted it.
Yes.
Wonderful. Item 8 is the internal audit plan, April to September 2022, pages 227. You're hiding there, Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the report you have before you today is our audit plan, and we are adapting our approach for this year. So historically, members will be aware that we ask the committee to approve a plan for a 12-month period. But I think what's become apparent over the past few years is that the council has had to adapt and change very quickly in response to external events and internal events. And by us as a service, having a very rigid 12-month plan doesn't allow us that flexibility to meet the needs of the council and adapt to new and emerging risks that are occurring at the time. So what we're proposing to do is actually set a plan for the next 6 months, and then over the course of summer, repeat that process again, so that we consult with stakeholders and we assess the risks that are facing the council at that point in time. We look at the priorities, we look at the risk registers, all the things that we normally do on an annual basis, we're intending to do twice a year, so that one, we have the audit plan from April to September, and then we'll do it again in summer, and then we'll come back to the committee with a second audit plan for the second half of the year. As I've said, that approach gives us that greater flexibility and allows us to respond to changes within the council as they occur. The other thing it does, it means that it allows us to really focus, so that when we give you the assurance at the end of the year, so annually when we give our opinion, the work that's been carried out is more risk-based, because we have targeted specific risks that the council are facing at the current time, rather than us trying to predict what we need to be doing in 13 months' time. So when we're planning, we plan in February, but sometimes it's for March. Reviews we're going to complete the following February, March time. So it's over a 13-month period. So we're hoping by taking this approach, it's much more targeted. But as I've said, it doesn't impact upon the assurance that we'll be able to give the committee. When I come back in May 23 and give my opinion, it will be based on the work that's been completed over the 2 6-month plans. So it will cover everything that we do from April this year through to March next year. This approach has been approved by the senior management team. So really, we're just asking the committee to approve that revised approach for us. In addition, what this approach will allow us to do is I've raised concerns this year, that the concerns we've had with the issues we've had with recruitment and selection and retention of staff over the past 12 months. So this approach allows us to really adapt the plan to the resources we have available. So to overcome the resource issues that we've had, we are planning to take on a trainee later in the year, but obviously we can't put them in the plan full time until we know how productive they're going to be and how quickly they're becoming trained. So what this approach allows us to do is really target the plan to meet the resources that we have available as well. There's just a couple of other things. I have attached the plan for the first 6 months, Appendix A. And I've added in a column as well that highlights how the plan links to the corporate risks, or our corporate plan, or the AGS or business plans. Just a couple of other items on the report. The service has been asked to provide Chorley Leisure Limited with 105 audit days. And the intention is that once each of these reviews has been completed, the report will be issued to the Board of Directors of Chorley Leisure Limited, and then on an annual basis, I will report back to this committee and give an opinion on, like I do for the council, on their risk management, governance and internal control arrangements. I've detailed what our resources we have available for the first 6 months. As I said, that will hopefully change by the recruitment of a trainee. And there's no change to our performance indicators for the forthcoming year, and these will be reported throughout the year as we have done so. Lastly, the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards requires us to have a charter that sets out our authority, and our responsibilities and reporting lines and so off, our access arrangements. And although we only reviewed it last year, we've had to amend it to take into account the fact that we are now auditing for Chorley Leisure Limited, and that's attached to Appendix B. But I'm happy to answer any questions on the report.
Thanks, Dawn. Do any members have any questions about that report and the charter at the back? Okay, we are asked to that the committee approve the internal audit plan and the associated indicators, and that the committee also approve the internal audit charter. So if you want to take a vote on that. Okay, that's carried, thank you. Item 9, GDPR update. We've got Chris Moister, the Director of Governance, here to give us this report at pages 239 to 42.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a GDPR update report. We didn't originally intended to do a review of GDPR some 2 years after it was implemented. Unfortunately, and hopefully this is the last time I will have to say this, COVID got in the way, and we didn't actually undertake the review at that time. It was felt that was acceptable for two reasons. One is that the policy framework had only recently been implemented, and obviously we'd established it and training had been delivered to all staff, so there was fresh knowledge of it. But the other point of reference really for us was there was no significant changes being undertaken to the GDPR legislation in the last 4 years. So as a starting point, what we'd done in 2018 should have been compliant. But it was appropriate to do a review. At the end of last year, beginning of this, I asked Legal Services to review the policy framework that was currently in place. And you'll see at paragraph 11, there's a list of policies that have been reviewed by Legal Services. Now, this is not an audit, a compliance audit. This is a simple check against the legislative requirements. Unsurprisingly, they're all still compliant because there hasn't been any changes to the legislation. There are a couple of, I've put amendments, but I suppose that you classify them as improvements really to the policies that, you know, are just rewording and so on, rather than any particular changes to them that make a difference, but they're just to make them easier to use. We didn't look for evidence of compliance with the policies, of reviews by the services of the policies, because or at least we couldn't see any. Now, it's not ideal, because ideally you'd want these policies reviewed on an annual basis. Responsibility sits with the teams, but the committee shouldn't take away from that these reviews haven't taken place, only that it wasn't noted on the policy that they've been reviewed. And it could be that there was no need to change the policy, which is why there's no evidence of review. And like I say, the policies were compliant. We did not review the information security framework. This is a document that's owned by the CIRO, who's the Senior Information Reporting Officer for the Council. It sits alongside the GDPR framework, but it is a form of processing for the Council. It's how we digitally secure our data, or secure all our data. And that's held by IT, and that's being reviewed by them separately. We did consider data retention, so particularly the corporate data retention and erasure policy. So this sets out the corporate approach to retention periods. Individual teams have their own policies where there is a need to depart from those corporate periods, because obviously data under the GDPR, you have to consider the need to hold that particular item of data for the purpose that you hold it. So a single corporate period isn't really acceptable. Teams need to be reviewing the data that they hold and why, and for what period themselves. So there's no one size fits all. They've not been reviewed because obviously they're required to be considered by the individual teams. But they are in a standard form, so the periods are for the teams to own, but the policies themselves will be at least compliant on the way they're presented. There will, however, be a piece of work on the embeddedness of the data deletion periods and the policies undertaken by internal audit later in the next municipal year as part of the audit plan. So we'll at least get some steer on how embedded our policies and processes are. Although I can tell you, I did a quick chase up as part of my role as data protection officer with some teams, and I am getting confirmation that they are complying with their data deletion policies. Data controllers, this is one area where there is a piece of work to be done. The way that the council have set things up is that individual services have nominated their own data controllers to have responsibility for the policies and compliance within their services and teams. Obviously, these have changed a little bit in the last 2 years, and what we're doing is making sure that those lists of data controllers are fully up to date and the appropriate training has been delivered to those people in those roles. We have online training, which I'm coming on to now, which is available to all staff. There are 2 levels of it. One is for data processors, that's everybody who uses the data, and one is for data controllers, it's a higher level of training to enable them to fulfil that function. We did mandatory training in the last 6 months, so all staff were expected to complete what the appropriate level of training for their role, and I'm just waiting to get feedback to look at compliance levels for that. But I think from memory we got confirmation from HR at an SMT meeting that there had been it was either 100% or very high 90s of completion of that training. Another form of assurance we can take away from it, though, is just reported data breaches. We have quite a robust approach where a data breach has been identified. That's where we have not complied with our policies and misused data or misprocessed data in some way. And we proactively self-report where we feel it is appropriate to do so. And since the 1st of April last year, we have self-reported twice. Arguably, one of them certainly was at the lower end of the scale and potentially didn't need to be self-reported, but the CSIRO and myself both think it's very important to demonstrate to the ICO that we're committed to the principles of GDPR, but also to get some sort of feedback from them as to the response, the actions we put in place to try and prevent it happen again, to get some comfort that we're dealing with these matters appropriately. So in light of the reports and the actions that we took, the ICO have taken no action in relation to either of the self-report. And I think it's important for members to note that it was actually the council that picked up these issues as well, rather than being reported externally, which is some evidence that our processes are working and our checks are working too. On a wider basis, since the implementation of GDPR, and hopefully the last time I mentioned this as well, Brexit, nationally we've got an adequacy decision, so the UK legislation has been deemed adequate for the purposes of the European Union. This may seem odd, but it's really important to us that, particularly with the holding of digital data, whilst we're satisfied at the moment, both our own data and the data of ours that is held by our contractors sits within the UK, the adequacy decision enables outside storage of that data, which is particularly important with cloud-based services where data centres are dotted around the world. This enables us to have more confidence in the contractors being compliant with GDPR legislation as well, so that's quite important. So that's the update, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Chris. Does anybody have any questions for Chris in the data protection and no? Oh, sorry. See beyond my glasses.
Yep.
Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I can see there's a lot of mention in the GDPR update about staff. Now, there's nothing in there for actually members. I remember when I first came on to the council, I had to do mandatory GDPR training. Can you answer, does that still go on? It's been done for the latest councillors that have come on, and it's going to be in place, obviously, from whoever's coming on in May. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Clifford. Yeah, duly wrist slapped. Yeah, I should have included reference to members in this, and you're quite right. We pay, on behalf of members, the fee to the ICO. So you're all data controllers, and the training is available to members as well through the e-learning function. But it is part of the induction training, I think, as well. So for new members, yes, certainly they should have picked it up. But I'll make sure, and I'll make a note of that there's some training rolled out for members as part of the member support sessions throughout the year.
Is there any more questions? Okay, we're recommended to note that, so noted. Item 10 is the Local Code of Corporate Governance, which is pages 243 to 262. Again, it's Chris, Director of Governance.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, quickly spin through. Yes, the Council have adopted previously a Local Code of Corporate Governance. It's not a statutory requirement, but it is good practice as defined through the Sit for Solace guidance. So we've reviewed and refreshed the one that was approved last year. It is substantially the same document. What it does is the local code sets out our framework, which we can assess ourselves against, of how we meet the 7 principles set out within the Sit for Solace guidance document. It's supposed to be an aid for not only officers and councillors, but also for the public to be able to see how we discharge our duties and act in the best interest of the public and deliver value for money. It's really important that we get this right, because, as I say, it's the document we test ourselves against when we're looking at things like the annual governance statement. So it's a real own goal if we don't get the local code correct. The main changes you'll probably pick up from the document from last year is a slight reordering. So previously, there is a table which I will just tell you which page it's on, which is currently on page 251 of the agenda, which sets out how the principles link to key documents and supporting processes of the council. So I've moved that into the main body of the document. That was actually an appendix before, but actually it's quite a good graphical representation of how what the council does and how we undertake our work supports these key principles that are set out within the Sit for Solace guidance. And then what I have done is I've taken out the boring tables bit and put them as appendices at the back now, because they're the actual list of supporting evidence as to how we meet these commitments and how we commit to deliver the different principles. So it is similar, substantially the same document really. The evidence, if you really want to go through with a fine-tooth comb, there are some changes because we've updated policies, names, and changed policies and adopted new policies. So they're now referenced in the new document. So any changes, those will be changes you pick up. So again, happy to take any questions on that.
Thanks, Chris. Has anybody got any questions on that, on the Local Code of Corporate Governance? No? Okay, so the recommendation is for members to approve the Local Code of Corporate Governance at Appendix A to this report. So if you want to vote on that one. Cheers. That's carried. So item 11 is the RIPA application update. Chris again.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just waiting for some music for this one. No? Okay. Right, okay. The verbal update, we haven't done any RIPA applications since the last committee, so there's no update to provide, Chair.
Thanks, Chris. And on to item 12, which is the work programme. Which you can see there, what's coming up in May, July and November. Anybody got any questions on the work programme? No, so the work programme is noted, and I have no further urgent business from anybody.